All right, I'm joined by Tory Brown, the designer of Votes for Women. Hello, Tory.
Hello, Harold.
And then I'm also joined by Judge Kevin Bertram from the 6th District Superior Court Circuit. How are you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing amazing.
So, very exciting news that Votes for Women won the Summit Award. And from an SDHist perspective, we couldn't be more excited. It is a wonderful game, but as I've said over and over and over, and I will say yet again, it's the right game by the right designer on the right topic at the right time by the right publisher. The alignment of the stars is extraordinary, and the excitement that it's generating around the hobby and in the historical gaming hobby in specific is wonderful. So with that, Tory, I'm going to start by asking you, what drove you to design a game on the suffrage movement in the United States, and what's the linkage? I'd love to hear it.
Sure. So I'd say there are lots of reasons, but two really stand out. The first is pretty practical. The idea for this game came to me about a year before the United States celebrated the centennial of the 19th Amendment. I read an article about plans and everything that was going to happen on August 20th, 2020. And I just thought, like, what an amazing moment. It's been 100 years. It's only been 100 years. And that it would be just the right time for a game like this. That we're sort of far enough from the history, but there's lots relevant today, which is also sort of the other piece is very, so that was very practical, and the spark and the timing. There's also a very personal reason for Votes for Women. I've worked in movement politics almost my entire life. I've been a part of the labor movement, reproductive justice, all sorts of different kinds of fights for a better, more just world. And to tell this story of a lot of women and some dudes too, I'll give them a little bit of credit, coming together in the kind of mass mobilization way to talk about what it takes to pass a constitutional amendment, to talk about the barriers and the sort of fortification that was required for the suffrage movement. I hope to inspire players to think about movements that exist today and to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And so it was just a really great story to talk about what feels like an important lesson about how we make our country and our world a better, more democratic, more fair place for us all.
So you live in DC or near DC, right?
I do, yes.
And so you're in the midst of this political wrangling and have been for a long time.
That's right.
Is that also something that excited you about the topic?
It is. And really, so I live and work in DC. I've done a lot at the federal level, Congress, some advocacy around at the Supreme Court, certainly at the executive. And that's a piece of the game. But the real meat and potatoes of Votes for Women is that work campaigning across the country. And also in my work, I've done a lot of campaigns that happen out in the states that are governor's races and what's happening in state legislatures, where important things happen. And in some ways, Votes for Women is this like loud primal scream about the importance of campaigning and organizing in the states.
Love it. Love it. So were there challenges in creating a game around such important history?
I mean, we're talking about 70 years of American history from 1848 to 1920. And there's been a really great record of this era. Suffragists donated their documents, letters, scrapbooks to the Library of Congress. Things were kept in pretty great form, right? It's this 1848 to 1920 period. You're seeing, a lot of sort of proliferation of printing so that flyers can be made and record keeping that's happening. So wading through all of that history and not only wading through what felt like 1,000 reams of historical documents, but then to winnow into a deck that covers what's important, keeps things kind of interesting, isn't just then this happened and then this happened and then this happened, right? A professor of mine used to call papers miniskirt length. You have to cover everything that's important, but keep it short enough to be interesting. And in a non-sexist way, I think this game really tried. It was really difficult to pick not just what was important and what's, let's say, covered on the Wikipedia page, but stuff people might not have heard about, stuff that would surprise players, because it couldn't just be, well, Susan B. Anthony and Alice Paul got the constitutional amendment. It really needed to give this idea of discovery that would make it more interesting than just what you would get reading a textbook.
Is there one repository or source in particular that's important to the game?
The Library of Congress collection is quite remarkable. And it holds a great amount of the sort of late era deck. The Alice Paul, right, sort of once the doldrums have finished in 1910, Washington State ratifies or enfranchises women in state, and like sort of that 10-year period, there's a ton of information. But I think what was most important was the Centennial Commission that gave money to state historical foundations, right? Like if anybody watching right now is interested in suffrage history in their state, look at your state historical society. There surely would have been an exhibit created and some curation of materials around the centennial that gave the game a lot of texture and important movement across those states, that I think the commission funding individual state historical societies made this game much more interesting than it would have been if I had tried to make it in 2010.
So the response to the game has been tremendous. Do you have any stories or anecdotes on people's impression of the game and how they were moved?
I mean, well, first I'll say that Kevin and I, and you said, you spoke about how the stars had sort of aligned for this game. At a certain point, working on it for 2.5 years, it felt like it was like going at an astronomical pace, and like takes a very long time to get a very short distance. So I think, and we talked in this period about reactions and reviews, and Kevin kept assuring me that people would really like the game, but that also there would be negative he spent a lot of time as a first-time designer preparing me for negative reviews, and there've been some of them are really funny. Some of them are like, oh, you just don't understand the game. And some of them are heartfelt and earnest and thoughtful in that this is a game that doesn't meet with them. And so it's just sort of interesting, so all of that has happened. But I was prepared for the negative reviews. I am not prepared for just how it's connected with people and just how people have learned and been so enthusiastic and share, and it's hard to pick out just one. I mean, I think hearing from folks that they never realized women had opposed suffrage, right? The real basic fact of backlash and of what we assume people's interests are and what they perceive their interests to be. I think being able to expose people to, it wasn't just these like old crusty men in back rooms that were like, I don't want ladies to vote. The deck is full of those men. Those men existed, but the breadth of opposition and what that looked like and what that meant, I think learning about people's surprise and being able to sort of open up this door to them, hopefully it means that they'll think about that people will oppose things today, and that not because they're monsters, just because they think about things differently, but together in a multiracial democratic society, we should be able to come to a consensus that your feelings don't trump my rights and what is just. And so it's been really interesting to sort of watch that conversation, how emotional or visceral playing opposition has been for people. I was not prepared for people straight out saying, I won't play opposition. I mean, the Oppobot deck exists so people can play, don't have to play opposition, but people have been very outspoken about how uncomfortable it is to play as opposition. And I just thought people that played games with Nazis would be a little bit more in tune to why there are two sides to things sometimes.
Right. But it's interesting, right? I mean, there are plenty of people that won't play games with Nazis, right?
There are. But it's a lot of these people that play game with Nazis that don't want to play opposition.
It's curious. It's curious. So are there any other stories or anything else you'd like to let us know about votes and how it came about and what you're excited about and how you feel?
I think one really cool thing that has happened, Labyrinth is the friendly little game store in Washington, D.C. I think the best friendly little game store. Kathleen Donahue, the owner, was a huge help as a play tester, has been a great advocate for the game. She helped organize an event on August 20th, Women's Equality Day, and invited some park rangers from a National Park Service site dedicated to the suffrage movement and to women's history. And so I got a chance to meet these like super cool park rangers, and I just saw them recently at a different event. And it turns out that the site had been under repair and that they opened late August, early September, but they didn't have their archive set up. They didn't have cases that could handle these original documents that they have in their collection. So they are using the reproductions from in the box of Votes for Women on the walls of this national park site labeled as reproductions. But for my game to be just a small part of the Belmont Paul House on Capitol Hill, former headquarters of the National Women's Party, mecca, if you will, of American feminist history, to be a small part of that and to have the game be a part of that it's like the nerd cred is so high. It is so intense to feel to be a part of that and to have the game be a part of American history. It's super cool. Who else? Like if I make a game about, I don't know, like mice and fighting pirates or whatever, probably not going to get in the Belmont Paul House. But you make a suffrage game, bingo, bingo. There you go.
That's so cool. So cool. Well, congratulations again, and congratulations on the Summit Award.
I'm so appreciative to the San Diego History Con community. It from the jump, and I know that Kevin was able to go last year and play test it. So these were like some really early acolytes for the game. And on Twitter, now on Blue Sky, I'm trying to stay away from Twitter, although it's very hard. The SDHist folks have been supportive. They've been encouraging. It has been wonderful. And it's, like I said, a community. It is not just a conference. It is not just a Discord server. It's not just a conversation happening on social media. These people are really aligned in values and in, I think, there's lots of difference and lots of, discussion, we'll call it nicely, that happens inside the community. But by and large, folks have just been so wonderful. I am super grateful for this award and to be associated with San Diego History Con in this way, because it's been nothing but warm, welcoming, and supportive. And I'm just super grateful for the Summit Award.
Thanks for saying that. And Tory, you and even Kevin are members of the team now. So please act as such.
We've been enlisted.
Have we taught you the secret handshake yet? Yeah.
Not yet.
I'm gonna go to Kevin. And Kevin, let's see. Give me a minute to manage my pens here, which I thought I was better at than I am, but there we go. So, Kevin, you've known Tory for a while prior to her development, so you recognize some brilliance and probably were friends, but also recognize her ability to pull things together and tell a great story.
Well, I guess since you know, Tori and I were debate partners for a semester in college when I was a 29-year-old returning student and she was a 17-year-old first-year student. And so we were sort of the odd couple of college debate for a semester, but our friendship stayed for quite a long time. And, you know, I don't want to be too effusive, but, you know, obviously I'm just very impressed with, you know, her intelligence and her appreciation of detail and, you know, all of the different skills that really make for a good board game designer. And so working on this, especially because it was mostly done during the pandemic, was a great thing for us to work on. It was really just a fantastic, you know, it's nice when you get to work with your friends. Now, of course, we included a much wider group of people. There were graphic designers. Brigette Indelicato did an amazing job. Then when she went on maternity leave, Marc Rodrigue finished up on that. We had a number of hundreds of play testers. And then Jason Matthews was one of our senior play testers but, you know, I think you can see a little bit of his input on the game too. So, yeah, it was just a super joy working with Tori, and now I get to bask in the glow of her success, which is kind of nice for me. So how can I complain?
That's great. What a great story. What school?
George Mason University.
Go Patriots.
Love it. Love it. We so a lot of time passed, not a lot of time. I don't mean to make it, I don't want to label us as any of us as old, but time has passed between the time you were partners on the debate team to the point in time where you formed this game company, which I think now is officially the coolest game company. I don't know if you're aware, we haven't made that official award yet public, but I think that
send me the trophy when you do.
I think that Fort Circle may be the coolest game company now, and you've had a lot of success, right? So not just votes for women, but what's the magic, Kevin? What are you doing right?
Well, you know, that's very kind of you to say, but we've only published 2 games. But I think that we've taken this time to really get it right. Like, what are the things that make a game a superior product without driving up the cost too much? And so, you know, it's even little things like the thickness of the box and the thickness of the board and the attention to the historical documents. And, you know, I'd like to think that we're just doing some things a little bit different. And I hope, you know, other companies start doing the very same thing. So got me a little flustered by saying such nice things to me. I'm not used to that. So I think what we have shown, though, is that there is a market for attractive looking, intelligent, yet accessible games about history. And while we certainly are not the only company doing that, you know, I look at, you know, Whirligig puts out some amazing stuff. Obviously, GMT has been putting out, you know, a large volume of games every year, some of which I love. And so, you know, I think that if we can kind of occupy a spot, particularly in looking at topics that are undergamed in history, I think that offers us kind of a unique spot to be. And if that's cool, great. I think that's cool too then.
You mentioned the documents that are in the game, the historical documents, which is a unique touch and I think very special, right? I when I sat down with Tori for the first time, and she was teaching it to 2 other people, but was looking through the box. I spent, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes reading the documents that you added that weren't just printed in the rules. They were separate and they were curated with some care. What was your idea there, and what happens next? What's the next game going to include?
Well, so we took a little flyer with our first game, Shores of Tripoli, and we included a letter that Thomas Jefferson had sent to the Bashaw of Tripoli that was written in that beautiful early 1800s language that was actually extremely threatening, but of course sounded all flowery and nice. And that was a big hit. And because we want people to be excited about history and excited about education, there's nothing better than primary documents. And so, or, facsimiles of them. And so I asked Tory to put together a list of documents, and she came up with a bunch. She always tells the story that I only wanted 3. In fairness, that was my wife who only wanted 3 because she didn't think people would want that many. I always wanted more also. And although there's one piece in there, the letter from the guano magnet was actually my insistence, because we're releasing a game about the guano trade probably in 2025. And it's right, it increases the cost of production by a little bit, but I think it's more than worth it in that it brings the history alive to you in the way that just having an essay or just having a historical booklet doesn't. Essays good, right? We include them. For the Halls of Montezuma, we actually have 2 essays. We have lots of documents. And I think that mix of the 2 is really helpful for bringing the history alive to people. And hopefully it spurs them to want to learn more, whether it's about, movement politics or the Mexican-American War or the history of the Supreme Court, or, whichever game of ours that they pick up.
Good. Well, that's an interesting snapshot into what might be coming, right? The with Votes for Women, there's an important story to tell, and one that gamers don't know very well, right? I mean, most of us gamers are not, right? So did that create challenges for you in as a publisher?
I think it's actually been very good for us as a publisher, because it has shown that we're willing to look at topics that aren't traditional, and that's garnered a lot of interest, not only from the public, but from designers who might want to try designing something a little bit different. And so we're a tiny bit experimental, even though our games are fairly they're not outside of the ordinary, the mechanisms, but there's a little pushback. I've gotten why don't you just stick to making war games emails, but that doesn't faze me very much. I find myself very defensive for Tory, even though she can take care of herself. She's a big girl, but yet I find myself, because I'm just like an older brother, a little depressed, but I'm like, say whatever junk you want to me. So it hasn't bothered me that much, or really not at all. So I think overall it's been a real plus, except for the occasional random review on Amazon or Board Game Geek. Other than that, who cares? So I think it's actually been a real positive for us. And so we're going to be publishing a game by David Thompson and Liz Davidson on the Night Witches, and I don't know that we would be publishing that game if we hadn't published Votes for Women. And that's a game that I think that will win awards just like Votes for Women has. So right. I think it's been great for us.
Oh, and 2 designers with the reputations of Liz and David. It's not that publishers pick them; they pick the publisher. So I think that's a wonderful vote of confidence, not just based on the history of what you've done, but also your history of treatment of people. And so I think that's all wonderful feedback for America's coolest game company. What about what's next for Fort Circle Games?
Well, so we're releasing the Halls of Montezuma and the second printing of Votes for Women in Q1, and then I wish they would have been here for Christmas, but alas. And then we have kind of the next 3 set of games we have. One is first Monday in October, which is by a new designer, Talia Rosen, on the history of the Supreme Court. It's an outstanding game. It's taking us a little longer to get the art right, but we're working with the Supreme Court Historical Society, which has been very gratifying. And so that's going to be a fantastic game and just overall product when it's released. We have a game, and Night Witches, which is, of course, about the Soviet female pilots during World War II. And then we have a game that kind of flew under the radar. I didn't think would be very good. And then, but Maurice Suckling and his team demoed it for me at our convention, called Peace 1905. And it's about the Russo-Japanese peace treaty that came out, and that because Teddy Roosevelt had put them together, and he ended up getting the Nobel Peace Prize for that. And that game is amazing. Like, it is amazing. And when they first pitched me on, I was like, yeah, I'll take a look at it. But I wasn't really all that excited about it. And now I think this game is amazing. And then further out, so that's kind of our next group of games. And then we have, Jason Matthews has been working on a game on the Treason Trial of Aaron Burr for years now. We'll see if he ever gets it done. And my wife and I have a co-design on the guano trade of the 1800s that is actually, I think, going to be a fantastic game. I use the phrase fantastic a lot, but that's how I feel about our games. I'm just excited about them. And then we have several more coming down the pike. It's really, can we publish 4 games a year? I mean, that's biting off a lot, but I think we can and still keep the high quality of the product. So yeah, so I'm very excited about what we have coming down the pike for everybody.
Yeah, well, looking forward to many of those. And there's one other that you didn't mention that I'm not going to mention, but I'm very, very interested in as well.
Which one is that?
I'm not going to mention it. If you don't mention it, that's not my place to
maybe I just thought I mentioned it and I didn't mention it.
It's another game that you had at the SDHist Con that you were showing off.
Oh, Halls of Montezuma?
No. Okay, look, my goodness, you're being coy, and I didn't mean to be. I'm not going to stand for it, Kevin.
So the reason why I actually don't think about that is because we're not going to be running a Kickstarter for that game. So the game is Shakespeare's First Folio, and it is sort of a on-commission project for the Shakespeare Folger Library, which is the museum here in Washington, D.C., that actually has the largest number of Shakespeare's First Folios in the world, more than even they have in all of England. And it's a super fun game. It's a little lower on the complexity scale than most of our games because it's meant for a wider audience. But because they've pre-ordered a bunch of them, like, it's not going to go through the normal Kickstarter process. So that's why I kind of sometimes leave it out. But no, I'm very excited about that game. And I think that game might be the one that has the best chance of really getting wide release, because both its complexity level is very low, not too low, but low. And yet it's still a meaningful decisions, and it's Shakespeare, and Shakespeare is still cool. No, so they haven't killed him off yet in the Academy.
For fans of the Bard, it's going to be a high priority. And I think, your location there in DC just gives you access to so much cool history and stuff and thought process that I think is really going to give you, the high ground for some time. So,
well, you see it in the technology industry, right? People here, Silicon Valley is, of course, the best known. Austin, here in Washington, D.C., AOL had been a big company, and then everybody leaves and they start their companies, and there's this ecosystem that gets created. And for historical board games, there's no real location that has that, except now I kind of think Washington, D.C. does. We have a fantastic local game store. We have all of these designers, Tory and Volko and Jason and, 15 others. And we happen to be in the right spot to be able to work with all these people. And then all of the history, the Smithsonian's are here, and all kind, the Supreme Court Historical Society is here. The League of Women Voters, who we worked with Votes for Women on, is here. So this is a great place to be if you're interested in history and making amazing games. So, I'm very, very glad that I live in my 1925 house, which gets a little cold in the winter sometimes, but yeah, I wouldn't have it any other way. I love living here in DC. So
yeah, it's awesome. And then, also you didn't even mention the professional gamers that are centered there around the hub. And many of them are hobbyists at a minimum and designers to some extent as well.
Oh, and I even forgot to mention not only all those professional designers, but with both Sebastian Bay teaches a course at Georgetown. The U.S. Naval Academy has a course that a lot of us designers go and judge students' designs. And, some of them aren't very good, but some of them have some really great ideas. They're rough, but they're interesting. And we can't help but benefit from being able to look at these, young starting off designers who might not really be game designers. They're just taking a class, or they might, they're foreign service, or they're going to be naval officers. But it's great. And then, Quantico does great things, and the U.S. Naval Academy's library or museum does great things. So yeah, it's a hotbed of activity. So.
And I would be remiss if I didn't give you a chance to talk a little bit about your April convention, which I hope to make this year.
So Circle DC is the name of the convention. We had our first one last year in 2023. We had it in a rather unique location that everybody who was there the first year will just know what I'm talking about. And it was fantastic. It was... So I made an effort to model it on SDHist Con, which I think of as, it's a small-ish, intimate convention with lots of designers, a few publishers, to really just kind of get together with, an extended group of friends to play games and go to dinner. And then because we are here in DC, we hope the first one, we had a tour of the Pentagon, which was pretty great. And, this year we're looking at both a tour of the Folger Shakespeare Library, a tour of the Supreme Court, the Belmont Paul House. So we're, fitting all of those kind of activities in with what is also, of course, the primary reason people are here is to game and see publishers and the normal things that happen in convention. So we don't push it too much because we don't want it to be too big, but I think we're hoping that about 200 people this year would be perfect sized for us. And so I'll be launching news about it in January and letting people register. So
good.
Yeah, we're very excited about it, and we would love to see you come out. So
I would like to.
I don't know if you're a fan of good food, but I do know a couple of restaurants here in DC.
Well, look at me. Silly question. Silly question. Look, for both of you, it was a real pleasure to talk to you both and to enjoy the stories about Votes for Women and Fort Circle Games, the coolest game company in America. Now, you could lose that title, right?
I'm aware.
I'm happy to take it away from you if you trip up. So we'll be watching closely, but we have high expectations, Kevin. And Tory, we didn't even have time to talk about what's next, but we'll save that for a future discussion because I'm very interested in where you're going. And thank you both again for taking the time to talk.
My pleasure.
Thank you for the award, but mostly for the community. It takes effort to create community, to sustain, to set norms, and it doesn't just happen on its own. And I really appreciate, especially given the vast vagaries of the gaming community, spaces that are welcoming, that care about bringing new voices, new perspectives, and just new players into the room rather than sort of like, vanguarding or, rear guarding, I think, a lot of the activity. So I just, it was a lovely time in San Diego at the con this year. Even the spring deployment was a lot of fun. I've just been really happy to be a part of this and really grateful for the support and the award.
Well, thank you both, and look forward to doing this again soon.